I think for me, again, it's that ability to kind of zoom out and say, in the whole great scheme of life, yes, this has taken 6 years or something, but we're going to live in this for the rest of our lives, So I could be living in this house for 40 years. The 6 years that I'm putting into getting it right now is not going to seem like a whole lot in that context. So being able to step back out and look at the broader context is what helps me in lots and lots of things that I'm doing. And of course, then there's always the little things like, we're in construction at present, and whilst I have done everything that I have been taught to do and that I learned from you about making sure that we've made all the selections, and I've built an amazing team around me for this project, many of whom have been guests on your shows because I'm a big believer in recommendations. So, and the more I can learn about the person, whether I think that they're going to be a fit for me in terms of how I like to work, then, the better. So as I've kind of progressed through that process, there have been, especially now, I thought, all the decisions are made. We know exactly what we do. And then I'm like, you get to go and pick, 4 light fittings, your choice, whatever you like. And then you go, I should buy that one because that fits in the budget, but I really love that one. So there's been, little tweaks as we've gone along. And sometimes, and again, the other thing that's been really interesting about this process for me has been that as is a custom build, it's not absolute high-end, stuff, but I like nice things. And my builder had said to me, because of something, and there's certain things that so lighting has been a big, I've had a lighting designer, and we've really, probably spec'd the lighting at the higher end because that's something that I really appreciate in a house and I think makes a big difference to how a house feels. But I'm not a big one for being in the kitchen. So I don't really care about the kitchen appliances. So my builder was kind of a bit confused. He's like, you've got these really expensive lighting plan and you're going for these pretty average. And I'm like, yeah, because I don't want to be in the kitchen. I don't care as long as the oven works, But I know for other people that is an absolute priority. So, even those sorts of things about knowing enough about yourself and your values and what's important to you, and then being able to make decisions accordingly. I won't spend a lot of money on kitchen appliances because I don't care, but I'm going to spend a lot of money on the lighting, for example, or, there's things about, and I've seen other people build houses around me and there's things like, those tiles are starting to look pretty ordinary after 5 years. I don't want that. So I'll, spec the tiles up a little bit higher, but maybe I don't care so much about, I don't know, something else that somebody else cares about. So knowing who you are and your values and what's important to you has been a big one for me as well in terms of budget and how to make those decisions about what to spend money on and what to not spend as much money on. It's all spending money. It gets to a point where it's like monopoly money. So that's helped.
Yeah. You've completely nailed it on the head in terms of knowing yourself. And I think too, what's coming through is that you have the ability to hold uncertainty and it not completely consume you to do that. I've been sharing a saying that I heard a while back that humans would rather be unhappy than uncertain. And I think that's why a lot of people do run into problems with their projects, because creating a custom renovation or new build does contain a lot of uncertainty. And if you're somebody that is going to choose unhappiness over uncertainty, then chances are you're going to barrel through your project really quickly. You're going to make decisions that aren't in alignment with you, that you're not too phased about, but because you need to make a decision. Whereas you can hold uncertainty and you can go in with the expectation that this is actually an incremental achievement of knowledge and information and education. And then you've been doing the research and the work through prepping yourself through home method, but then knowing that your application of that knowledge will come at a point in the future as your project rolls forward. I think you've done a really good job of leaning into that, which is then paying dividends in how you've been able to show up in your project in this way.
Yeah. And look, that's such a beautiful way to put it, because again, psychologically it is that very much, we talk about holding things lightly, this idea of holding it lightly rather than holding onto it with a white knuckle grip. And that's probably that, exactly what you just said about that, being able to hold uncertainty. There is a huge amount of uncertainty in a project. project like this, especially given it's taken the time period that it has for us, and there's been so much change in that intervening period, and that has been really critical, that ability to, and I'm not going to say that I've always done it well. I know there's been times of, semi-crisis, but I think, it is uncertain across so many dimensions. And for me, it sounds kind of weird, but in a way, I think the time that it's taken's actually been helpful, because it's allowed me to sit in that space for a while at any point in the project, whether that was the initial design and concept stuff, through to choosing builders, through to, making decisions now about some of the construction elements. I've had a lot of time to think about this project. I've a lot of time to be in this project. I've made a lot of decisions over a long period. And so you get the opportunity to sit with those decisions and think about, why did I do it that way? Why have we made that selection? Anchoring it back to those sort of key design elements, and being able to, I suppose, trust your judgment. And look, I can say this, I'm 51 years old, I've got a lot of life experience now to kind of chuck into a project like this. And I think one of the things that I've certainly been saying to myself a lot of late has been trust your instincts. Just trust your instincts with this, because there isn't a guidebook, there isn't a rule book, there's no perfection. You just need to trust that whatever you're doing, given that you've learned, given that you're doing it increment by increment, will come together. Does that mean there won't be things that I'll go, oh, might have done that differently if I'd had my time again? Sure. And that's part of it too. I think it's acknowledging that and saying, this is progress over perfection. And I had a funny experience. I had to go out to the showroom to look at our windows before, we decided on what we were having, and we decided who we were going to get them from. But I just had to go out and actually have a look, because they're UPVC windows, and I really didn't have a concept of what they looked and felt like. In my head, they were plastic. Like, I don't really understand. So I had to go out and actually have a look at the show, and I was blown away. They're amazing. But I had to make a decision about what handles to put, all these little things. So what handles to put on the windows? They're tilt and turn windows, and then we've got sliding doors, all sort of in the same space. The handles that go with the sliding doors can't be the same as what selection I'd made for the remaining windows. They just don't do them in that color. And so I'm standing there going, oh, wow, is it going to be weird if we have, this, we've gone through like a brushed bronze, and then these ones would have to be a brushed chrome. And I go, oh, is that really weird? And it was actually Michelle, the wonderful woman at the showroom, who, we both kind of looked at each other and we just went, you know what? No one's going to notice, are they? And she's like, no one's going to notice. She said, maybe your architect might come in and go, oh, why have you chosen that? But nobody else. And it's that ability to, I call it zooming out, that ability to get perspective and to be able to go, in the whole great scheme of things, this is about the feel and the function of the house. It's not about the door handles. And so if the door handles are different, I've never lived in a house that was perfect before. I've lived in so many houses, and like I was talking about before, some of them have been very, very far from perfect, almost unlivable. So it is hard, because you are being put in a position to make all of these decisions, and you want to get those decisions right. But by the same token, you have to have a bit of perspective in that and say, you know what, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. If the door handles are slightly different colors, no one else is going to notice. You've got to let that go. And that's always, something that I think everybody grapples with. Some people more than others. Some people do find decision making hard, and they do find it difficult there's this kind of what we call conservation theory. It's this conservation of loss. So as human beings, we would much prefer to not lose something than to gain something. So when it comes to making decisions, we find it more stressful, the prospect of losing something. So the prospect of making the wrong decision feels more stressful than the prospect of making the right decision. And that kind of frames up the way we think about it. We think about, what will I lose here if I make the wrong decision? What will that be like? Instead of just saying, what am I going to gain from this decision? So being able to remind myself of things like that, to be able to say, what we're gaining is this beautiful house that we're going to have designed for our family, that is going to be situated where we want to be, that is going to have sky and light, and it's going to be thermally comfortable. And so if the door handles are different colors, really does that matter? But again, it sometimes it's a constant battle.
Yeah, that is an extraordinary, that conservation of loss is an articulation that I've not heard before, and it's fantastic. I mean, like this, I think it's the second step in Home Method. We talk you through about actually figuring out what you're seeking to achieve from creating this new build or renovation, so that you do have a place to come to remember why you're doing this, to make those decisions simpler as you're navigating them, because there's going to be tens of thousands of them. And so that thing of the door handles aren't going to matter. I think too that idea of thinking about what you're going to gain by making that decision and keeping the project moving forward. And at the same time, for some people, that decision will really matter. So them knowing themselves about what are the decisions that they can be more relaxed about versus the decisions that they do want to prioritize, because not everything can be important all of the time. And so I love that you've had that awareness as you've been navigating this project. And yeah, you're right. Nobody's going to notice probably except an architect when they walk in.
Or my mum. My mum might notice.
and if you ever have an Undercover Architect community member over to your house who's listening to this podcast,
they'll know to look.
they'll know to look. So. And just quickly before we move on, I wanted to chat to you about how you chose your builder and obviously made that decision. But just quickly about the design and the fact that the kids have grown older. Has that impacted any changes, or you find that you're kind of you've been navigating that okay?
Not fundamentally. I do sometimes wonder, because I think the kids are now 16 and 13. Well, he'll be 13 by the time we move into the house. And we live in a regional area. They could easily disappear off to university or something else. The eldest, he's got 2 years left of high school, which has just barreled up on us very quickly. So sometimes I do think, oh my goodness, this can be a very big house for the two of us. I mean, it's not a massive house, but it will be more than ample for two people. But then again, you have to kind of have perspective. And I look at other families that I know, and even my own situation, I still go back and stay at my parents' place at times because they're in Melbourne, if that's convenient, and what I think we've missed out on a lot in the time that we've been in Ballarat, because we just haven't had the accommodation for it, has been the ability to house guests. We have family and friends who are interstate and overseas. So when they come, they've not been able to stay with us. And that's been disappointing because we're missing out on that lovely opportunity. So whilst it might not be that we have the kids in those bedrooms all the time, they'll always be there for them if and when they do come back. And also we'll be able to accommodate friends. And again, it's this compromise piece. I almost look at it and go, well, we've designed the house in a way that, my husband and I might go overseas and we rent it out, or you could Airbnb some of it or something rather like that. It's not been a conscious, we'll keep a separate part of the house to be able to do that. But it's always been in my mind that, and I suppose this is, part of just getting older too, you never know what's around the corner in life. And so this idea that you can plan something out with a very clear picture of what the trajectory looks like, I've just discovered is not realistic. Certainly not for me. There's been way too many twists and turns in my life to be able to say, well, we're doing it this way because this is what it's going to look like. So bearing that in mind has been helpful. And, fundamentally the design has been about something that is big enough to be comfortable for four of us and designed for us to be able to live the way we live, but not ridiculous. It's not over the top. Yes, I have a dedicated office space, which I'm so looking forward to because I've worked for myself largely for 22 years now and never had a proper dedicated office space, certainly not one that's designed for, the way I work and what I do. So that at times feels like a bit of an indulgence when you look at the floor plan, but then, it is this balance between, but that's actually important for me. the other thing, and I know you and I discussed this very, very early on, is that I'm the only, other than my two dogs, our two dogs, I'm the only girl in my household. I have a husband and two sons. And so this idea of having a space that is for me, that I'm seriously going to deck out in pinks and greens and oranges and, that is like my zone is actually really appealing. And it might be that nobody much else is in the rest of the house for periods, but I'm going to be in my space where I do my work, and that's just for me. So there's this kind of balance between a little bit of indulgence and practicality, and not really knowing what life's going to look like. So as long as there's enough flexibility in the design and the floor plan that we can adapt to whatever life throws at us, that's kind of had to shape some of those decisions. But it is interesting because I know when I first started out, I was thinking, oh, well, we're going to need a playroom for the kids. Well, we don't need a playroom for the kids when they're 16 and 13. We barely need 2 living rooms because they spend all their time in their bedrooms. But, we just had the garden design done, which I love, by a local designer. And she's been able to actually factor in, again, this concept of design and how you like to live and work rather than just what it looks like. And so we've been able to build that bit around having older children. So we've got, a fire pit kind of tucked away where teenagers can hang out, and, we'll have a deck that might be, where my husband and I are, or we have friends over, and, it is designed so that there's kind of little sections and little areas where people can have enough space to themselves to do their own thing, but it still all be connected together. So, again, flexibility, hold it lightly is key. Yeah. It certainly has been for us.
Yeah, and I remember with that when we were working through the design was, there was very clear kind of requests I remember us talking about, we don't need a guest bedroom per se, because when we were growing up, we used to just all bunk in. If we had family come to stay, we just all bunked into one bedroom, and the other bedroom got given to the guest. And then it was like, well, what can we do with the second living space to make it multi-purpose? And we were doing a lot of that in the design to keep it compact, to keep it constrained, and still give you those opportunities for that space for yourself, a decent work from home space, and that the kids had rooms that were useful to them, and all of those kinds of things. So it's great to see that that approach is still carrying through. And I think Absolutely. You're right, that whole kind of approach of flexibility, not knowing what's around the corner, is ultimately what's going to pay dividends, and then bringing the moments of joy in terms of how you fit spaces out and that kind of stuff. Definitely worthwhile. Can we talk through how you chose your builder? Because obviously if your builder was somebody that you met very early on, and then you've obviously continued that relationship, what was, how did you go through that process of making that choice for them to be the one to actually construct the home?
He's very patient. So I met Mark very early on, and to be honest, again, I was reflecting on this, and I'm trying to remember exactly how I even went about. I think Talina had a few builders that she knew of that she recommended, so I had a kind of a list, and I approached several, and there might have been others as well. I can't even remember now. It was too long ago, but essentially, this sounds really unscientific, but I went with the vibe. So I had people, and it is really interesting how different builders operate, how they run their businesses. Whilst the construction might all be the same, there's all of these other elements to it, how they administer, how they work with clients, their processes that kind of underlie all of that are really different. So I had some builders who I contacted, and I think initially I just sent emails to like half a dozen. And I had some who came back and basically said, well, here's my list of questions. This, what do you want, what rooms are you having? What size are the things? All of that. And I kind of went, oh, that feels a bit impersonal. That didn't really feel like it gelled with me. I'm like, how do you know what my vision is for this project if that's the way you approach it? I had others who just flat out said, no, there's no way you can build that for that budget. And I'm like, okay, well, rule them out. So there was a bit of a kind of a process of deselection, I suppose, that meant that people were kind of, those options closed off. And Mark was great because he said, right, I'll meet you on site. Let's have a conversation. And we did, we stood in the backyard and he listened and he was interested and he asked questions, and there was no kind of pressure. There was no, it wasn't, I didn't get the feeling that this was being viewed as a commercial opportunity for him. I know it is, he runs a business, but it felt more like somebody who you might want to work with to build a forever home. And so over time, I think we stood in that backyard and talked for maybe an hour. He was also just really easy to talk to, and that kind of helped me feel comfortable that this would be somebody that I could say, you know what, Mark, I don't know if that's working for me, or I've got a question about this, or this might be really dumb, but I don't understand X. And so that was always really critical for me. And again, I think that was one of the things that I've learned through the home method and through the Undercover Architect content has been, this is a team that you've got to work with, and relationships are really important. So that kind of set the tone. Then over time, I'd kind of decided he was the person that I wanted to work with. But of course, we'd had this literally years go by. And at different points, as we got to, I suppose, moments of readiness to make the next point, or take to the next stage, I would check in and say, just letting you know, this is where we're at, initial drawings and things. What are your thoughts? And so it wasn't kind of the full incorporated design process, but I was always checking in, and he was always great. He would sit there for an hour or 2 hours with me, no expectation of a contract necessarily, no costs associated. So again, it just showed me that he was somebody who was going to be invested in this process and in this build. And again, I got to a point where I went, right, I think he's the builder that I really want to work with, but I have to do my due diligence. We were getting to the point of being able to price the build and get quotes. So I said, I've got to do it the right way. I'll put it out to 3 or 4 builders, and that included a volume builder who said they did custom stuff. And it was interesting because there was another builder who was also really great, who I was very comfortable with, who I really, liked his work. I hadn't spent as much time with him, but he was clearly another really good potential choice. And we got to the point of putting it out to for quotes. And I got 3 quotes, 2 from the custom builders and 1 from a volume builder. And the volume builder, I decided very early on, was not going to be for me. There was no oversight of how they did things. They said, oh no, we don't need your drawings, we do our own drawings. So a whole lot of things that for me just did not feel, I kept being told to go and look at tiles and doorknobs or something without being asked any questions about, and I'd project managed this build up to this point for years. I was the only person, my husband hasn't been nearly as actively involved in this as me. So I was the only person who really knew this. And to me, it was kind of like, why aren't you asking me? Anyway, so I quickly discounted that because I just went, that's not the way I want to work. And so these 2 custom builders, and the price came in, and we're talking, a decent sized amount of money. It costs a lot to build a new home. And the quotes were within, I think, $3,000 of each other.
Wow.
So that was kind of I was going to say, right, okay, we'll make a decision based on even that then was a case of, I can't choose one over the other on the basis of $3,000. So ultimately, because I had this relationship with Mark, he'd invested so much time and been so patient. And so that, and there was a level of, I suppose, detail to the way he operates that I really appreciated, because I'm not always brilliant with detail. And so I really wanted somebody who I knew. So anyway, I suppose I talk about the vibe. It's not vibe at all. I know that it's a synthesis of a whole lot of layers of information.
I did all my due diligence. I asked all these questions. I saw how their business operated.
Exactly. So I'm saying it feels like it was a vibe. It wasn't really a vibe, but that was certainly part of it. Part of it was this relationship element to it. So that was the decision. That, and he was at a point too, and I think this really helped. Sometimes you've got to take your cues from other people. And so he was at a point towards the end of last year where he said, I've got to plan out my jobs for next year. Are you ready to go? If so, are we doing this? And that was kind of like, right, I've just got to pull the pin now, because if I don't, I'm going to miss the opportunity to work with him. I knew at that point that there was still a lot of construction going on. There's been a lot of construction in Ballarat for a number of years now, and I didn't want to risk delaying this project or having to go with a builder that I perhaps wasn't as comfortable with. So it was a case of, right, I've just got to pull the pin and sign this contract now. And so we did. And look, I've not regretted it for a moment. He's been amazing to work with, and continues to be. So yeah, it was the right decision. And it, I suppose, did take a little while to get there, but ultimately went with the first builder I met.
No, it's fantastic. And it is, I mean, I can hear how much you actually knew to assess about the builder that you were. So even though he was somebody that you met early on and had an alignment and a connection on a personal level, you still did all of the work to investigate. And I think the fact that the proposals are between those two builders that you were leaning towards was only $3,000 apart is a testament to the fact that you actually had done a bunch of research on asking the right builders to price the project, because I feel that, the fact that, you looked at the volume builder and they didn't come back to you with the questions that you thought needed to be asked about your project. And so you dismissed them. So I think your ability to educate yourself about how to interview the builder shows in the way that you were then able to assess that fit early on. And then, come down to that point of timing and alignment of, and knowing one, obviously having spent a lot more time with one than the other.
Yeah. And look, again, and I suppose I hadn't really thought about it, but just as you've paraphrased that for me, realizing that, there was a huge amount of learning in all of the stuff that I've covered in the home method, in the conversations that you've had in that. And I can't remember, there was a podcast series that was the Manage Your Build. So I think that's where I kind of started, was this Manage Your Build. So a huge amount of learning in there in terms of understanding, the finance, all of those sorts of things that may not have been at the forefront of my mind, but clearly they're there somewhere, and it has been factored into all of those conversations. I think the other thing that probably really helped with that, that small difference between two builders, was all the learning I did about how to go into that quote process. So I had all my selections made. I'd worked with an interior designer, I'd worked with a lighting designer, I'd worked with the draftsperson, I'd worked with two architects. There was already quite a team involved in getting to that point. And I had made all of my selections. I knew which windows I wanted, not necessarily the colors or, the final absolute decisions, but I knew that we wanted triple glazed UPVC windows. I knew that I'd made decisions about taps, tiles, toilets, wallpaper, again, not quite paint colors, but those were to come. But certainly all of the things that needed to go into a quote. And we had a really complete set of drawings that were very detailed. My drafty was amazing. So that just meant that our builders then, when it came to the point of quoting, were able to give, I think, a pretty realistic quote, because the detail was there. And I needed to learn all about that stuff to get us to that point to be able to do that then. And I think that was the difference between very early on, when I went out to builders and didn't really know quite what I was doing, was that they'd sort of ask questions and go, I don't know, because I hadn't done all of that work yet. So, that's been a huge part of the learning for me. And it's been really interesting when I talk to people, because people say, oh, how's the building going? And, some people will be going, oh my God, are you building this house yet? This has taken ages. And for me, I knew that there was a huge amount of work going on behind the scenes, because there is, there's this huge amount of work that has to be done to get you ready to sign a contract and then start demolishing things and building new things. For me, that was literally years of work that was happening that led up to that point. And yet for other people, they can't, until you actually see stuff starting on site, they don't see any of that. So, even knowing that through all the learning that I've done through all the, Undercover architect resources, I can look at other people's building projects now and say, oh my God, I appreciate the huge amount of work that they've done and what they've done to prepare to get to the point where you start to see something physically happen on site.
Yeah, I think you've done an amazing job of your preparation. I also think you've done a really interesting job of your mindset as well to navigate it. because I think I had somebody actually just ask me on a social media post this morning, does a project really take 2 to 3 years to navigate at a minimum? And I said, well, from the first point of having a conversation with the designer and figuring out who you're going to start building that team with through to construction completion, it can take that long. That's an overestimation. Like, that surprises people. Your project has obviously taken longer because you hit hurdles and bumps along the way, and the way that life sort of rolled out. How have you managed your mindset through all of that? You've touched a little bit on it as we've been chatting, but I suppose, what have you kept anchoring back into to maintain motivation, to maintain momentum, to not get completely demoralized by it and feel like it was worth continuing to pursue?
Well, there were certainly moments where I did feel like that, I have to be honest. But I think for me, again, it's that ability to kind of zoom out and say, in the whole great scheme of life, yes, this has taken 6 years or something, but we're going to live in this for the rest of our lives, So I could be living in this house for 40 years. The 6 years that I'm putting into getting it right now is not going to seem like a whole lot in that context. So being able to step back out and look at the broader context is what helps me in lots and lots of things that I'm doing. Not always in every moment, because there were absolutely moments where I just thought, why am I even doing this? This is nuts. This is so hard. This is so slow. This is taking too much work. But again, having that vision of where we wanted to get to as a family, and what I wanted that to look like, not just for now, but for when I'm in my 60s and when I'm in my 70s and when I'm in my 80s. I can still see myself living in that house for decades. And so that helps to put some of those things into perspective and to remind you that, yeah, it's a slog right now, but it will get to a point where it gets done. And that, to some extent, still feels miraculous. When I go and stand on site and I can see, we've got frame and a roof and window frames and doors, it still does feel miraculous to me that that's actually happened. And it's a source of pride too, because I made it happen, with an incredible team of people that I built around me, with all of their expertise and all of their assistance. Couldn't have done any of that without me. It absolutely is a team pursuit, but I had to drive it all the way, and I had to drive myself. I did have to get through those days where I just went, why am I even doing this? But the vision of, and the frustration of living, we've been very fortunate in that we've had somewhere else to live over the ensuing periods that wasn't the original house, but it's not ideal. So there are days when you're just trying to jam, trying to make space in your wardrobe to jam something in, and you go, oh my God, we will get there. We will get to a point where I have a wardrobe that's been designed for, what I have and what I need. We will have enough room. I've got a 16-year-old who's 5'11" and physically doesn't fit in his bedroom. And we all know this, and he gets frustrated, and I feel his frustration, but I keep saying, mate, we're getting there. We're getting there. You'll have a bedroom that's big enough with a built-in desk, with enough wardrobe space, with a queen size bed that you could fit into. He's still literally sleeping in the bed that he's had since he was a toddler. So, those sorts of frustrations sometimes have also helped to just oh, this is hard, and this is why I have to keep going with this, because we need to move on from where we are into this new home.
Yeah, I love it. And I'm so looking forward to getting you back on to chat about the construction process and how that's gone for you, because I know that it's been really exciting to watch it come to fruition and to see that unfolding on site. So I know that you'll have a lot to share from that point of view. I can't wait, because I know how much this home's going to change your life. And so and I think it's such a testament to your determination and your motivation to keep pushing it through. Is there anything that, before we wrap up, that you wanted to share before we finish?
No, only that it's actually, as we've had this conversation, been really interesting to kind of reflect at a different level and realize how much I have learned. You kind of take it for granted because, as I said, learning's an incremental thing. You just kind of keep adding knowledge, and you forget that there was a point at which you didn't know some of these things. So to be able to have the resource and to learn, and even just to have conversations with people to realize that, and the Undercover Architect, the Facebook group is really useful, because sometimes I look and I'll see people asking questions and going, oh, I remember when I thought that, or I didn't know that, or I had those questions. And you realize that you've moved on, or you're still learning. Somebody will ask a question, go, oh my God, I didn't even think about that. Goodness, I should be. So having those resources and exposing yourself to something where you can learn, where you've got access to information, where you've got access to expertise, I think has been absolutely critical. And aside from anything else, helps you to feel a little less alone, because it is such a massive undertaking. And to do it entirely on your own, I don't think I could have done it. I think even from a resilience perspective, I don't think I could have done it if I thought that this was just me in this, knowing that you are almost accountable to all the people that you've worked with along the way, because they're invested in seeing this project come to life as well. Has just helped enormously. So for anybody starting out, it's a slow process. It is a learning process, but you learn as you go, and you see things happen slowly. And those points, I was talking to somebody this morning and I said, oh my God, I could never have imagined I would get so excited about a retaining wall. But I have the best retaining wall in Ballarat. I love it. The little moments of joy like that help keep bolstering you along.
Oh, that's awesome, Ellen. Thank you so much for your time and sharing all of your incredible wisdom and your knowledge. I know that this is going to be super helpful for so many, and the conversation that we've particularly had around where your insights of experience and expertise from a psychological point of view, I know have added a huge amount of value to this conversation. So thank you so much for being here. And as I said, can't wait to get you back on and talk about construction. Super grateful for your time.
Looking forward to it. Thank you.